The morning air in the Galactic Defense Academy's training courtyard carried the scent of alien flora and the sharp tang of ozone from energy weapons. Sarah Martinez sat alone on the stone steps, watching her fellow cadets practice combat formations under the twin suns of Kepler 442b. At 17, she was the youngest human ever admitted to the prestigious academy, though you wouldn't know it from the way others treated her. "Look at the mute human," sneered Vextar, a towering Krillian whose crystalline exoskeleton caught the light like fractured diamonds. His forearms gestured dismissively as he spoke to his cluster of followers. 3 months here and she's barely said 100 words. Humans are supposed to be the chatty ones, aren't they? The group of alien cadets laughed, their various forms of mirth creating a cacophony that echoed off the academy's crystalline walls. There was Jesh, a serpentine Nagai whose scales rippled with amusement, and Boom Ka, a massive Gorleon whose thick hide quivered as he chuckled. Even some of the other human cadets joined in, desperate to fit in with their more physically impressive classmates. Sarah didn't react. She never did. Instead, she continued reading her tactical manual, fingers tracing the holographic displays that showed fleet formations and weapons configurations. The words flowed through her mind like water, each piece of information finding its place in the vast library she'd built in her head since childhood. "Maybe she's broken," suggested Jesh, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "I heard humans from the outer colonies sometimes have genetic defects from all the radiation exposure." This drew another round of laughter. Sarah's grip tightened slightly on her datapad, but her expression remained unchanged. She'd heard worse. Growing up on Titan Station, she'd been the weird kid who preferred reading to playing, who could spend hours analyzing battle strategies instead of socializing. Her parents, both military engineers, had understood her differently, but they'd died in a reactor accident when she was 14. The Academy scholarship had been her only way forward. "Perhaps we should test her," Vextar continued, his voice carrying the subtle harmonics that made Krillian's speech sound like broken glass. "See if she can actually fight, or if Earth sent us a defective specimen." The suggestion sent a ripple of interest through the group. Combat challenges between cadets were common, though usually reserved for those of similar size and ability. Vexitar stood nearly 8 feet tall and could lift a small shuttle. Sarah was 5'4" and looked like a strong wind might blow her over. "That's hardly fair," said Marcus Webb, one of the few human cadets who occasionally defended her. "She's half his size." "Size doesn't matter in modern warfare," Vextar replied with false reasonableness. "At least, that's what the human instructors keep telling us. Something about intelligence over brute force." He took a step toward Sarah, his massive form casting a shadow over her. "What do you say, Silent One? Ready to prove your species deserves to be here?" Sarah finally looked up from her datapad. Her brown eyes, which most people dismissed as unremarkable, held a depth that made Vextar unconsciously step back. She studied him for a long moment, as if cataloging every detail of his anatomy and equipment loadout. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried clearly in the sudden hush. "If you insist." The simple acceptance sent a shock through the gathered cadets. They'd expected her to refuse, to make excuses, to run to the instructors. Instead, she calmly set down her datapad and stood, brushing dust from her standard-issue training uniform. She was so small, compared to the aliens surrounding her, that she looked like a child among giants. "Excellent," Vextar purred, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. "Training Ring 3. Non-lethal settings first to surrender or incapacitation. Jesh, you can referee." The crowd began moving toward the training area, excitement building. Word spread quickly through the Academy's communication networks, and soon dozens of cadets and even some instructors were gathering to watch what everyone assumed would be a brief and educational beating. Sarah walked calmly beside the group, ignoring the whispers and side glances. Her mind was already working, analyzing what she knew about Krillian physiology, their cultural approach to combat, and Vextar's specific habits she'd observed over the past months. Krillians were powerful but inflexible thinkers, preferring direct approaches over subtle ones. Their exoskeletons were nearly impervious to energy weapons on training settings, but they had weak points at the joints. More importantly, they were arrogant, especially when facing what they perceived as inferior opponents. The training ring was a circular platform 50 meters across, surrounded by an energy barrier that would prevent the fight from spilling into the audience. Weapon dispensers around the perimeter offered a variety of arms at training power levels, enough to cause pain and temporary incapacitation, but not permanent damage. Vextar immediately strode to the weapon dispensers, selecting a massive plasma cannon that required 2 of his 4 arms to wield properly. He also grabbed a personal energy shield generator and a molecular disruptor blade. The weight of his loadout would have crushed a normal human, but his enhanced physiology handled it easily. Sarah walked slowly around the ring's perimeter, her eyes taking in every detail. The surface was covered in a specialized foam that provided good traction, but absorbed impact. The weapons dispensers were positioned at regular intervals, each stocked with identical equipment. The energy barriers had specific frequency patterns that could be analyzed and potentially exploited. "Choose your weapons, human," Vextar called out, his voice amplified by his armor's speakers. "I grow tired of waiting." The crowd had swelled to nearly 300 beings now, a mix of cadets and instructors from dozens of different species. Sarah could hear the betting pools being organized in the background, with odds running heavily against her survival of more than 30 seconds. She approached the nearest weapon dispenser and made her selection. A single-pulse pistol, its grip designed for human hands. The weapon was considered a backup arm, used by pilots and support personnel rather than frontline fighters. It was lightweight, had limited range, and its energy output was barely sufficient to overload personal shields. "That's it?" Jesh asked in disbelief. "One training pistol?" Sarah nodded, checking the weapon's power cell and adjustment settings with practiced efficiency. She'd grown up around energy weapons, watching her parents work on military systems. Every pistol had small manufacturing variations that affected its performance, and she could feel this one's particular characteristics through the grip and weight distribution. "This should be over quickly," commented Instructor Thies, a massive Hurcan whose tusks were carved with battle honors. "The human child has no understanding of proper combat doctrine." "Perhaps that's the point," replied Instructor Chen, one of the few humans on the teaching staff. "Sometimes the best way to learn is through failure." The 2 opponents took their positions at opposite sides of the ring. Vextar's plasma cannon hummed with charging energy, its barrel already glowing with contained fire. His shield generator created a shimmering barrier in front of him, and his disruptor blade crackled with molecular cutting fields. He looked like a one-being army. Sarah stood quietly, her pistol held in a relaxed grip at her side. She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, something had changed. The scattered, distracted girl was gone, replaced by someone who moved with the precise confidence of a predator. "Begin," Jesh called out. Vextar immediately opened fire, his plasma cannon sending bolts of superheated energy racing across the ring. The shots were powerful enough to melt through standard armor plating, and they came in a steady stream that would overwhelm any normal defense. Sarah was no longer where the shots were aimed. She moved like water, flowing between the energy bolts with an economy of motion that seemed impossible. Each step was perfectly placed, each turn calculated to the centimeter. She wasn't running randomly. She was following a pattern that Vextar's mind couldn't track, staying just ahead of his targeting solutions. "Stand still and fight!" Vextar roared, sweeping his cannon in wide arcs to try to catch her. But Sarah was already moving, using the environment to her advantage. She bounced off the weapon dispensers. used the slight irregularities in the floor to change direction unexpectedly, and somehow managed to make herself a smaller target than physics should have allowed. The crowd's mocking laughter had died away, replaced by confused murmurs. This wasn't how the fight was supposed to go. Vexatar should have ended it within seconds, but somehow the small human was not only surviving, but making him look clumsy. "How is she doing that?" whispered Marcus Webb to another human cadet. "I don't know," came the reply. "It's like she knows where he's going to shoot before he does." That wasn't far from the truth. Sarah had spent the last 3 months studying her classmates, learning their habits and reactions. She knew that Vextar favored his upper right arm for aiming, that he had a slight delay between target acquisition and firing, and that his species' eyesight was optimized for forward vision with limited peripheral awareness. More than that, she understood the mathematics of their environment. The ring was a closed system with known variables: gravity, air resistance, weapon ranges, recharge times. Her human brain, evolved for pattern recognition and adaptability, was processing all of it in real time and finding the gaps in Vextar's coverage. Vextar's frustration was mounting. His energy reserves were depleting rapidly as he poured fire into empty air. Worse, he was starting to look foolish in front of the entire academy. His cultural programming demanded that he escalate, show his dominance through overwhelming force. He abandoned the plasma cannon and drew his disruptor blade, activating his personal thruster pack. If he couldn't hit her at range, he'd close to melee distance where his size and strength would matter. The thruster pack launched him across the ring like a missile, blade extended to skewer his tiny opponent. The crowd gasped as 2 tons of armored alien warrior hurtled toward the apparently defenseless human girl. Sarah waited until the last possible second, then dropped flat and rolled sideways. Vextar shot over her, his blade carving a furrow in the floor where she'd been standing. His momentum carried him into the far wall of the ring, where he crashed with enough force to crack the crystalline barrier. As he struggled to right himself, tangled in his own equipment, Sarah finally moved to attack. She didn't charge or make dramatic gestures. She simply walked calmly to where Vexatar was trying to stand, raised her pulse pistol, and fired a single shot at a specific point on his armor. The energy bolt struck the junction where his left shoulder joint met his torso, where the crystalline plating was thinnest to allow for movement. It was a target the size of a coin, and it required perfect timing to hit when the joint was in the right position. Vextar's entire left side went numb as the energy pulse overloaded his nervous system through the vulnerable point. His shield generator attached to that arm clattered to the floor. Half of his strength was suddenly gone. "Impossible," he gasped, staring at his limp arm. "That was a lucky shot." Sarah said nothing. She simply stepped to a different angle and fired again. This time the bolt hit the power coupling for his thruster pack, causing it to short out in a shower of sparks. Then another shot disabled his blade's energy field. Each shot was precise, calculated, and devastatingly effective. The crowd was dead silent now. Even the instructors had stopped their casual conversation to focus on what they were seeing. This wasn't luck or chance. This was surgical precision, the kind that came from understanding both the technology and the opponent at a level that most beings never achieved. Vexatar, now reduced to one working arm and his natural strength, made a final desperate charge. Sarah stepped aside, extended her foot at exactly the right moment, and sent him tumbling across the ring to land in a heap near the opposite wall. She walked over to where he lay, breathing heavily and struggling to understand what had happened to him. Without malice or drama, she pointed her pistol at his head and waited. "Do you surrender?" she asked quietly. The words hung in the air for a long moment. Around them, 300 of the galaxy's most promising military minds tried to process what they'd just witnessed. A human child had just systematically dismantled one of their most physically powerful classmates without breaking a sweat. Vexatar started, then stopped. His pride warred with the reality of his situation. "I surrender." Sarah nodded and holstered her weapon. She helped him to his feet with surprising gentleness, checking his injuries to make sure nothing was permanent. "Your reach advantage is 43 centimeters," she said conversationally as she helped him with his disabled equipment. "Your reaction time averages 0.23 seconds. Your plasma cannon overheats after 17 seconds of continuous fire. And your thruster pack has a minimum effective range that creates a vulnerable approach window. Your species' pride makes you predictable when frustrated." Vextar stared at her in shock. "How did you—" "I watch. I listen. I learn." Sarah's voice was matter-of-fact, without any trace of mockery. "You're actually quite formidable when you fight intelligently. You lost because you assumed I was weak instead of different." The ring fell silent except for the hum of recycling energy barriers. Sarah collected her datapad from where she'd left it and walked toward the exit, her posture unchanged from when she'd entered. She paused at the barrier threshold and turned back to address the crowd. "Humans aren't the strongest or the fastest," she said, her quiet voice somehow carrying to every corner of the amphitheater. "But we see patterns where others see chaos. We adapt where others break, and we survive where others fall." She looked directly at Vextar, who was still struggling to reactivate his equipment. "Remember that." Then she was gone, leaving behind 300 of the galaxy's future military leaders to contemplate what they'd just learned about the species they'd been so casually dismissing. In the silence that followed, Instructor Thess turned to Instructor Chen with newfound respect in his ancient eyes. "Perhaps," the Hyrcan rumbled, "we have been underestimating your people." Chen smiled grimly. "Sir, you have no idea." But even he didn't understand the full implications of what they'd witnessed. Sarah Martinez wasn't just a gifted human cadet. She was something new, shaped by loss and forged by necessity into a weapon that none of the galaxy's military academies were prepared to understand. And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, forces were already moving that would put her unique abilities to the ultimate test. 3 weeks after the fight that changed everything, Sarah Martinez found herself in an entirely different kind of isolation. The casual mockery had stopped, replaced by something far more complex. A mixture of awe, fear, and resentment that followed her through the Academy's corridors like a shadow. She sat in the Advanced Tactical Simulation Lab, surrounded by holographic star charts that painted her face in blue light. Around her, other cadets worked in small groups, their voices a constant murmur of discussion and debate. Sarah worked alone, as always. But now the solitude felt different, chosen rather than imposed. "The Kepler campaign," announced Professor Veltarion, a distinguished Meridian whose flowing robes concealed advanced cybernetic implants. "A 3-week simulation that will test everything you've learned about fleet coordination, resource management, and tactical decision-making. You'll be operating as squadron leaders, responsible for capital ships and their crews." Excited whispers filled the lab. The Kepler campaign was legendary among Academy students, a final examination that could make or break military careers before they even began. Only the top 10% of each class was invited to participate. "You'll be divided into teams of 5, the professor continued. Each team will command a small fleet against simulated enemy forces based on historical conflicts. The scenarios will be drawn from actual battles fought during the Hegemony Wars, with updated technology and tactics." Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest as she watched her classmates naturally gravitating toward each other, forming alliances and partnerships based on months of shared experiences. She'd been invited to join several groups over the past weeks. Her demonstration against Vextar had certainly proved her competence. But something always held her back. Perhaps it was the way they looked at her now, like she was a weapon they wanted to wield rather than a person they wanted to know. Martinez, Professor Veltarian called out. You'll be leading Team 7. The announcement sent a ripple of surprise through the room. Leadership positions were typically given to the most socially connected cadets, those who could command respect through charisma and established relationships. Sarah had neither, yet here she was being handed command of a 5-person squadron. Your team members are Chen Wei-Ming, Thessarian Novak, Kix Ra, and Zara al-Rashid. Sarah looked around and found her assigned teammates. Chen Wei-Ming was another human, a brilliant engineer from the Mars colonies who specialized in ship systems. Thessarian Novak was a Centauran whose people were renowned for their navigational abilities. Kix Ra was a young insectoid whose species had only recently joined the Galactic Alliance, and Zara al-Rashid was a human pilot whose family had been flying combat missions for 3 generations. They were all capable cadets, but none of them were the natural leaders or popular figures that usually commanded these exercises. It was a team of specialists and outsiders, much like Sarah herself. The 5 of them gathered around a tactical table as Professor Veltarian distributed their fleet assignments. Team 7 would command the cruiser Endeavour, 2 destroyers, and a support frigate. A balanced force suitable for reconnaissance and quick strikes rather than major fleet engagements. So, said Zara, her pilot's swagger evident even in casual conversation. I guess we're following the silent treatment girl now. The words weren't malicious, but they carried an edge of uncertainty. Everyone had heard about the fight, had seen the recordings that circulated through the Academy's networks. They knew Sarah could think tactically, but commanding a simulation was different from defeating a single opponent. Sarah studied the holographic display of their assigned vessels, her mind already cataloging their strengths and limitations. The Endeavour was an older design, reliable but not particularly fast. The destroyers were mismatched, one optimized for long-range engagement, the other for close-quarters combat. The frigate was primarily a support vessel, useful for logistics, but vulnerable in a fight. "What's our scenario?" asked Chen, pulling up additional technical specifications on his personal datapad. Professor Veltarian activated the main display, revealing a star system with multiple planets and asteroid fields. The Battle of Proxima 7. Historically, this was a disastrous defeat for the Alliance forces. Your objective is to prevent the enemy from establishing a foothold in the system while protecting civilian evacuation routes. Thessarian's elongated fingers traced patterns in the air as he analyzed the navigation challenges. Proxima 7 has unstable stellar phenomena, solar flares, gravitational anomalies. It's a nightmare to navigate, which is exactly why the enemy chose it as their invasion point, Kix Ra added, her compound eyes reflecting the hologram's light. They're counting on our inability to maneuver effectively. Sarah remained quiet as her teammates discussed the scenario, but her mind was working furiously. She pulled up historical records of the actual battle, studying not just the tactical decisions, but the underlying assumptions that had led to the Alliance defeat. The original commanders had treated it as a conventional engagement, trying to meet the enemy fleet head-on despite the environmental disadvantages. The original battle plan failed because they fought the enemy's fight, she said finally, her voice cutting through the discussion. We need to make them fight ours instead. The team turned to look at her, waiting for elaboration. Sarah manipulated the holographic display, highlighting specific areas of the star system. The enemy expects us to defend the evacuation routes directly. Instead, we use the environmental hazards as force multipliers. Draw them into the asteroid fields, use the solar flares to mask our movements, turn their advantages into disadvantages. That's actually brilliant, Chen admitted, running calculations on his datapad. If we time it right, we could use the gravitational anomalies to slingshot around their flanks. Zara grinned. Now you're talking. I've flown through worse than a little stellar turbulence. Over the next several hours, Team 7 developed their strategy. Unlike the other groups who focused on traditional fleet formations and established doctrines, they built their plan around unpredictability and environmental warfare. Sarah proved to be unlike any commander they'd worked with before. She listened to everyone's expertise, incorporated their insights, and somehow wove them into a coherent whole that was stronger than its parts. The simulation began 3 days later in the Academy's main tactical center. Hundreds of cadets and instructors gathered to watch as 10 teams commanded virtual fleets in simultaneous battles across different scenarios. The main screen divided into sections, each showing a different team's progress. Team 7's section showed the Proxima system in all its chaotic glory. Solar flares painted space in brilliant oranges and reds, while asteroid fields drifted in complex patterns, influenced by gravitational anomalies. Into this maelstrom came the enemy fleet. 12 vessels led by a massive battleship, moving with the confident precision of a force that had never known defeat. "Enemy contacts incoming," reported Thessarian from his navigation station. "Formation suggests standard assault pattern, moving to secure the primary evacuation route." "Let them have it," Sarah replied calmly. "Zara, take us into the asteroid field. Chen, I need you to modify our sensor arrays for close-range work. Kixra, prepare boarding pods." "Boarding pods?" Zara asked in surprise. "Commander, we're outgunned 3-1. This isn't the time for close combat." "It's exactly the time," Sarah countered. "They're not expecting it, and their formations are optimized for long-range engagement. Get us close enough, and their size becomes a disadvantage." The other teams were engaging in traditional ship-to-ship combat, trading volleys at maximum range while maneuvering for tactical advantage. It was textbook fleet doctrine, exactly what the Academy had taught them for years. Team 7 disappeared into the asteroid field like ghosts. On the main viewing screen, Professor Veltarian watched with growing interest as Sarah's unconventional strategy unfolded. "Fascinating," he murmured to Instructor Chen. "She's using the environment as a third party in the engagement." The enemy fleet, finding no significant resistance along the main evacuation route, began to spread out to secure the system. This was exactly what Sarah had been waiting for. "Now!" she commanded. Team 7 struck like a pack of wolves. The Endeavor emerged from behind a massive asteroid, its modified sensors allowing pinpoint targeting despite the electromagnetic interference. The destroyers attacked from opposite vectors, using gravitational slingshots to achieve impossible approach speeds. The frigate, loaded with boarding pods and marines, punched through the enemy's rear guard to attack their command vessel directly. "Impossible!" declared the enemy commander, actually a senior instructor playing the role. "How did they get so close without detection?" The answer was pure human ingenuity. Sarah had realized that the same stellar phenomena that made the system difficult to navigate also created perfect cover for unconventional tactics. While other species tried to overcome the environmental challenges through superior technology, humans had learned to embrace chaos and turn it into an advantage. The battle that followed was unlike anything the Academy had ever seen. Team 7's ships danced through the asteroid fields like living things, appearing from nowhere to strike vital targets before vanishing back into the cosmic maze. They turned the enemy's superior firepower against itself, using precise timing to lure hostile ships into destroying each other. "Enemy flagship is reporting critical systems failure," Kixra announced with barely contained excitement. "Their command structure is compromised." "All enemy vessels are withdrawing from the system," Thessarian added. "Evacuation routes remain secure." The simulation ended with Team 7 achieving a total victory, the first time in the exercise's history that the Alliance forces had won without losing a single ship. The tactical center erupted in amazed discussion as cadets and instructors tried to understand what they'd just witnessed. but Sarah's attention was already elsewhere. As her teammates celebrated their unprecedented success, she noticed something troubling in the background displays, routine communications intercepts that most people would have ignored entirely. "Professor," she called out, her voice cutting through the celebration, "we need to talk." Professor Veltarian approached their station, still amazed by their performance. "Congratulations, Team 7. That was extraordinary tactical thinking." "Thank you, sir, but that's not why I called you over." Sarah pulled up a series of communication logs that had been running passively during the simulation. "These intercepts from the outer system monitoring stations, they're not part of the exercise, are they?" The professor's expression changed as he examined the data. "No. These are real-time feeds from the actual Proxima 7 system." His face went pale as he realized the implications. "Alert command immediately. This isn't a training scenario anymore." The intercepts showed massive fleet movements in the outer rim, ships moving in patterns that exactly matched the historical Proxima 7 invasion. But this wasn't a simulation or a historical reenactment. This was happening now, in real space, with real ships carrying real weapons. Within minutes, the Academy's emergency protocols activated. Alarms blared as instructors received urgent communications from Alliance Command. The Hegemony, the same enemy faction from the historical scenarios, had returned after decades of dormancy. They were launching a coordinated assault on multiple frontier systems, starting with Proxima 7. "All senior cadets report to briefing stations immediately," announced Admiral Kess, the Academy Commandant, her voice echoing through the corridors. "This is not a drill." As chaos erupted around them, Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her mind. The simulation had been practice. Now came the real test. "Stay together," she told her teammates as they moved toward the briefing area. "Something tells me we're going to need each other." None of them realized it yet, but the quiet girl who had once been ridiculed for her silence was about to become one of the most important people in the galaxy. The Hegemony had chosen their return perfectly, striking when the Alliance was unprepared and scattered. They had made one critical error, however. They had no idea that humanity had produced something new, a generation of warriors who thought like no other species in known space, who could see patterns in chaos and turn disadvantage into victory. And the best of them all was walking calmly through the Academy corridors, her mind already working on problems that would challenge the greatest military minds of a dozen worlds. The fight was about to ignite indeed, but this time, the galaxy would discover what humans could really do when everything depended on their unique way of seeing the universe. The emergency briefing room buzzed with controlled chaos as Admiral Kess outlined the scope of the crisis. Holographic displays showed red indicators spreading across the galaxy's outer rim like a disease. 17 systems under attack, 8 already fallen, and Alliance forces scattered too thin to mount an effective defense. "The Hegemony has returned with new technology and improved tactics," the Admiral announced, her weathered face grim. "They're specifically targeting our training facilities, trying to eliminate the next generation of Alliance officers before they can graduate." Sarah sat with her team near the back of the room, listening as senior instructors debated response strategies. Most of the discussion centered on evacuation protocols and defensive positions, but she found herself studying the attack patterns instead. There was something familiar about the timing and coordination, something that reminded her of the historical scenarios they'd been studying. "The Academy will be evacuated within 6 hours," Admiral Kess continued. "All cadets will be transferred to secure facilities in the core systems until this crisis passes." "Admiral," Sarah said quietly, standing up from her seat. The room fell silent. In a briefing full of senior officers and experienced instructors, the interruption from a 17-year-old cadet was unprecedented. Admiral Kess fixed her with a stern gaze. "Yes, Cadet Martinez?" "With respect, ma'am," Evacuation is exactly what they want us to do. Sarah moved forward, approaching the main tactical display without permission. May I show you something? Admiral Kess studied her for a long moment. Reports of Sarah's unusual tactical abilities had reached even her level, but this was hardly the time for cadet theories. Still, something in the girl's absolute confidence made her nod. Sarah manipulated the holographic display, overlaying the current hegemony attack patterns with historical data from the original war. They're not just randomly attacking training facilities. Look at the sequence. They're forcing our response patterns to match historical precedents. The room watched as she highlighted the striking similarities. Each alliance evacuation, each defensive redeployment, each strategic withdrawal was following patterns from battles fought 50 years ago. They're hurting us, she continued, making us react exactly the way we did during the original war, when we lost. Professor Veltarion leaned forward, his cybernetic implants whirring as he processed the implications. You're suggesting they've studied our historical responses and are manipulating us into repeating them? More than that, Sarah replied. I think they've been planning this for decades. Every random hegemony probe over the years, every skirmish that seemed pointless. They were gathering data on how we've evolved our tactics since the war. Admiral Kess stepped closer to the display, her expression shifting from skepticism to alarmed interest. Continue. If I'm right, then they know exactly how we'll respond to each escalation. They've gamed out our entire strategic doctrine. Sarah pulled up fleet deployment records, showing how Alliance forces were already moving in predictable patterns. But there's one thing they can't account for, which is, they don't know how humans think now. Their data comes from a generation of officers trained in traditional Alliance doctrine. But we've been learning differently. The room erupted in discussion as senior officers grasped the implications. If Sarah was correct, then every standard Alliance response was potentially compromised. But if she was wrong, her alternative strategies could lead to catastrophic defeat. What do you propose? Admiral Kess asked finally. Don't evacuate the Academy. Use it as a trap. Sarah manipulated the display to show the local star system. The hegemony fleet approaching our position is following a textbook assault pattern. They expect us to run, which will expose our evacuation ships to their faster pursuit vessels. Instead, we stay and fight on our terms. Cadet, interrupted Captain Thane, a veteran Krillian officer. This academy has a handful of training vessels and a minimal defense grid. The approaching hegemony force includes 3 dreadnoughts and supporting craft. It's suicide. Only if we fight their fight, Sarah countered. But what if we don't? Over the next 2 hours, Sarah outlined a defense plan unlike anything in Alliance military doctrine. Instead of traditional fleet formations and defensive positions, she proposed using the Academy's unique resources, its diverse student body, its experimental technology labs, and its location in a system full of training obstacles and artificial hazards. The Academy's training courses include simulated asteroid fields, artificial gravity wells, and holographic decoy generators, she explained. Individually, they're just educational tools, but coordinated properly, they could create the most complex tactical environment in known space. You want to turn our training facilities into weapons? Asked Instructor Chen. I want to turn them into advantages, Sarah replied. The hegemony has planned for traditional defenses. They haven't planned for fighting inside a constantly changing maze of illusions and obstacles, commanded by people who understand the maze better than anyone. Admiral Kess studied the proposal with growing amazement. It was audacious to the point of madness, requiring precise coordination between dozens of different systems and hundreds of personnel. But it was also completely unpredictable, which made it potentially invaluable. Even if we could implement this plan, the Admiral said finally, we'd need someone to coordinate it all. The tactical complexity is beyond our current command systems. Cadet Martinez could do it, Professor Veltarion said quietly. I've watched her process information during simulations. Her pattern recognition abilities are unlike anything I've seen. The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. They were discussing putting a 17-year-old human in tactical command of one of the Alliance's most important educational facilities during an enemy assault by forces that had terrorized the galaxy for generations. It's impossible, Captain Thane declared. Command protocols alone would require years of training. Traditional command protocols, Sarah corrected. But what if we don't use traditional command structures either? She outlined her final innovation, a distributed command system where each team would operate with maximum autonomy, coordinated through rapid information sharing rather than hierarchical orders. Her academy classmates would command individual defense platforms and mobile units, each adapting to local conditions while contributing to an overall strategic picture. You're describing organized chaos, Admiral Kess observed. I'm describing human warfare, Sarah replied. We don't win through superior force or perfect coordination. We win through adaptation, innovation, and the ability to see opportunities where others see obstacles. The debate continued for another hour, but ultimately the math was inescapable. Traditional evacuation would result in heavy casualties and the loss of critical educational resources. Traditional defense would result in complete annihilation. Sarah's plan offered at least a chance of survival and possibly even victory. Very well, Admiral Kess announced. We implement the Martinez Protocol. All cadets will remain to support the defense. Senior staff will coordinate with Academy systems. And Cadet Martinez. She looked directly at Sarah. You'll have operational command of the Tactical Coordination Center. The transformation of the Academy began immediately. Training facilities that had been designed to educate were rapidly converted into weapons of war. Holographic generators created false asteroid fields around the station. Gravity manipulation systems established shifting zones of altered physics. Mobile defense platforms deployed throughout the system, each one commanded by teams of cadets who had spent months learning to work together. Sarah found herself in the Academy's main command center, surrounded by displays showing hundreds of variables across dozens of different systems. Her teammates from the simulation exercise were with her, Chen managing the technical systems, Thessarian coordinating navigation data, Kixra handling communications, and Zara commanding the mobile response units. Hegemony fleet dropping out of hyperspace, reported the sensor station. Estimated arrival in 40 minutes. On the main display, the enemy force materialized like a vision of nightmare. 3 massive dreadnoughts led a fleet of 37 vessels, their dark hulls bristling with enough firepower to destroy entire planets. They moved with the confident precision of a force that had never known defeat in direct combat. They're beautiful, in a terrifying way, Zara commented from her pilot station. They're predictable, Sarah replied, watching the formation patterns. Look at their approach vector. Textbook assault formation designed for maximum firepower concentration against fixed defenses. Around the Academy, her improvised defense network came online. Hundreds of cadets took their positions at stations they'd helped design, systems they understood better than any traditional military force. The quiet girl who had once sat alone was now connected to every mind in the defense, coordinating their individual expertise into something greater than its parts. Begin Phase 1, she announced calmly. The Hegemony fleet encountered its first surprise when the space around the Academy suddenly filled with asteroids that hadn't been there moments before. Holographic projectors created a maze of false obstacles, while hidden gravity generators made the false asteroids behave like real ones. "What is this?" demanded the Hegemony Admiral, a massive being whose species had conquered dozens of worlds. "These readings make no sense." His navigation officers struggled to plot safe courses through obstacles that seemed to move independently of physical laws. Ships designed for open space combat found themselves navigating narrow passages where their size became a liability rather than an advantage. Phase 2, Sarah called out. Mobile defense platforms emerged from hiding among the real asteroids, their small size and maneuverability allowing them to attack the confused enemy formation from impossible angles. Each platform was commanded by a team that had trained together for months, their coordination seamless, despite the lack of traditional command structures. The Hegemony fleet, designed to fight enemies that met them head-on, found themselves under attack by opponents they couldn't see, using tactics they couldn't predict. Their superior firepower meant nothing when they couldn't target effectively. "This is impossible!" the Hegemony admiral snarled. "Alliance forces don't fight like this." He was right. Traditional Alliance forces fought with discipline and doctrine, following established patterns that could be studied and countered. But the Academy's defense was something entirely different. Controlled chaos, guided by a mind that could see patterns where others saw only confusion. "They're adapting to our interference," Chen reported. "Their sensors are starting to compensate for the holographic obstacles." "Then we change the rules again," Sarah replied. Phase 3. The artificial gravity wells activated, creating zones where the normal laws of physics no longer applied. Hegemony ships found themselves pulled off course, their formation integrity dissolving as they struggled with forces their systems weren't designed to handle. But the enemy wasn't helpless. Gradually, their superior technology began to overcome the Academy's tricks. Advanced sensors pierced the holographic illusions, powerful engines overcame the gravity manipulation, and sheer firepower began to destroy the mobile defense platforms. "We're taking heavy losses," Kixra reported. "Platforms 7 through 12 are destroyed. The enemy is breaking through to attack range." On the main display, the 3 Hegemony dreadnoughts emerged from the artificial obstacle course, their massive forms scarred but intact. They were close enough now to begin bombardment of the Academy itself. "All right," Sarah said quietly. "Time for the real trap." She activated the Academy's final surprise, the training reactors. Every major Alliance educational facility had multiple fusion reactors to power their extensive systems, but these reactors had been modified over the past few hours, their output redirected into a massive energy grid that surrounded the Academy like a spider's web. "Fire everything," Sarah commanded. The space around the Academy erupted in the largest coordinated energy discharge in Alliance history. Every defensive weapon, every modified training system, every improvised energy projector fired simultaneously, powered by the combined output of reactors designed to run an entire educational complex. The 3 Hegemony dreadnoughts, caught in the center of the energy web, simply disappeared, vaporized by forces that exceeded their defensive capabilities by orders of magnitude. The remaining Hegemony fleet, suddenly leaderless and facing an enemy they couldn't understand, broke formation and fled into hyperspace. The Academy's defense had achieved the impossible. Victory against overwhelming odds, using nothing but ingenuity and unconventional thinking. In the aftermath, as rescue ships arrived and damage assessments began, Sarah found herself standing in the ruins of the command center. Around her, her teammates and classmates celebrated their impossible victory. But her mind was already elsewhere, processing the larger implications of what they'd accomplished. "Remarkable," said Admiral Kess, approaching through the debris. "I've been fighting for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like what you did here today." "It wasn't just me," Sarah replied. "It was all of us, thinking differently." "Yes, but you coordinated it. You saw the patterns, made the connections." The Admiral studied her with new respect. "The Alliance needs minds like yours, Cadet Martinez. Officers who can see opportunities where others see only obstacles." Sarah nodded. But her attention was drawn to the communications station, where reports were still coming in from across the galaxy. The hegemony assault was collapsing everywhere, their carefully planned operation falling apart as Alliance forces began adapting to unconventional tactics. "They made one mistake," she said quietly. "What's that?" "They assumed we'd stay the same." Sarah looked around at her classmates, each one representing a different species, a different way of thinking, a different approach to solving problems. "But humans don't stay the same. We evolve, we adapt, we find new ways to survive." She paused, considering the broader implications. "And when humans evolve, we bring everyone else with us." Admiral Kess followed her gaze, seeing the Academy's diverse student body with new understanding. Here were the children of a dozen different worlds, all learning to think and fight together, all contributing their unique perspectives to solutions no single species could have imagined. "The hegemony studied our old tactics," Sarah continued, "but they couldn't study what we were becoming. They prepared to fight the Alliance of 50 years ago, not the Alliance of today." In the days that followed, as the scope of the victory became clear, Sarah Martinez would find herself at the center of a military revolution. Her tactics would be studied and adapted across the Alliance fleet. Her approach to command would reshape officer training programs throughout known space. But none of that mattered to her, as much as the simple fact that her classmates no longer looked at her as the weird, quiet girl who didn't belong. They saw her as one of them. Different, perhaps, but valued for those differences, rather than rejected because of them. The galaxy had learned something important in the fire of battle. Humans weren't just another species to be cataloged and dismissed. They were something new, something unpredictable, something that could change the very nature of warfare itself. And the quiet girl, who had once been ridiculed for her silence, had become the voice of that revolution, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the universe was simply the ability to see the world differently than anyone expected. The hegemony was gone, retreating to lick their wounds and reconsider their assumptions about human capabilities. But Sarah knew they would return eventually, with new tactics and better preparation. When they did, humanity would be ready. Not just with new weapons or stronger ships, but with new ways of thinking that would make them unbeatable. After all, humans didn't just adapt to challenges, they evolved beyond them. And in a universe full of ancient species set in their ways, that made all the difference.